um, Dr. Zane Wolf and myself, and I think it flows right into our conversation actually, which is how is a caring leader held accountable for culture and outcomes? And I think we have begun to talk about that. I think we don't need the slide. Thank you. Zane, would you like to start?
Zane, I think you're muted.
Was going to do it. Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate the opportunity to think about this, and it's been a while since Kathleen and I talked about this, and we have the main question, and we can tell from yesterday and today that the main questions that were posed by the planners really work very well. We have some questions that may go beyond that, but I don't know that we'll really need them. And I really think that some of the material that we looked at had a lot of conversation about the differences between responsibility and accountability. So I would really like to throw that out to our leaders in clinical settings to see if they can explain how that's lived in their positions, because I think they are committed to both, but the distinctions are there, and I think it would be wonderful to have us understand more about the way they live it in their complex roles. So it's kind of like a challenge.
So this is Melissa. Are you asking how we live responsibility versus accountability?
Yeah, I do. I think that there's a big deal kind of made about it, and I have ideas about it, but the accountability idea is kind of quite brilliant, and I think very serious. And we're all responsible. I mean, there are rules, there are procedures, there are standards, national codes of ethics and values that are in the back of everything, I think. But I think that there's a brilliance in the way nurse leaders live accountability for huge organizations. And you know, I was a dean. There's no comparison, okay? I did a joint appointment in a hospital, which was one of the best things I ever did in my career. And I learned from a wonderful chief nurse, I'll tell you that. It was a wonderful experience. But I just think that as I've watched these wonderful people over the years, and you wonderful people, that you really do have a huge gold platinum standard about accountability. And I think it's a burden and it's a joy at the same time. So I'd just like you to tell us about it, or maybe think about something that's in a vignette or a story as you've lived it, Melissa.
Well, I'll talk about accountability. First of all, I want to preface it by saying nurse leaders are the only leaders in the organization that have hundreds of employees under them. When you look at the ancillary departments, they may have 30 to 50 employees. So right there, I just want to, preface that. The other thing is they have 24/7 responsibility, and there's not someone here 24/7, right? We might have a night nursing supervisor at night. So there is kind of, they can't be here all day and all night. And so that's something that I feel like in the future has to change. The accountability, I think, I know my nurse leaders, every week, 2 of them round on night shift. every single week, 2 different ones around on night shift to make sure they spread news and they kind of, just have a cheery face. And, we don't want night shift to think that no one's here for them. I think knowing what the expectations are about caring for their staff, that's really, really important to me. And that's why I feel so fortunate to have such a great team, a lot of discussion. And, we are responsive 24/7. I mean, whether it's nights, weekends, or whatever, it's in our hearts, and we want to be here for the staff and the patients. I think that the staff needs to see the leaders responsible and accountable to them, so that the staff knows that they are accountable to each other and the patients. And I think it's something that some people have innately. I think others need to be mentored along, and I think everybody's worth certainly teaching and mentoring and educating. But I do think that nursing leadership is probably the hardest job in the hospital, and we need to support them now more than ever, because we want our new nurses coming in to see how wonderful nursing is, and also nursing leadership. One thing that came up last week, and then I'll stop talking, which I thought was amazing. If I look back 10 years ago, if we had a nursing leadership position open, we might get applicants from the outside, but not too many from the inside, And we had a manager position come open. One of our managers was lucky and bought some land in Ocala, is moving. And I had five leaders apply for this one position, which showed me or told me, or I felt in my heart that they saw the worth, the wonder, and the caring of the leadership team. And so that's just one example.
Thank you. That's actually a wonderful example. I think it's a terrific example. I read a book. One of my youngest brother gave me a book when I was 60. Now, of course, this is a number of years ago, because I'm 76 now. But it was called The Nightingales. And because I'm desperate for books, because I read a lot to distract, I read this book on the Nightingale family. And I'm thinking about it because it gave me insights, even that she might have had chronic brucellosis from being in the Crimea and exposed to unpasteurized goat milk or something, that explained the way she behaved later on, but it almost seemed like she got better at the end. But I was thinking about her and duty and the way she conformed to the rules and the military, sort of fitting into, I think, the culture and matching the culture. And so the idea of the culture, as you create this leadership team that's supportive of each other, is really, really important to us. And we're thankful for it. And I think that it also transcends and goes down to the unit level somehow. That there is kind of this reverberation in a way, or modeling. And I think Sylvia sort of said it when she gave the exemplar about the beautiful nursing, that she sort of did this like cascading down of this really wonderful, I would say, intervention in a way, that basically took care of the leaders. And I don't think a lot of us think about how leaders are cared for. I really don't. I know I can speak to deans, and that's the truth too. And people who are in the most important part of nursing work to me, and that is the care delivery part of it, the direct and indirect care delivery part of it. So it's kind of fascinating to me to see how you create this culture, and what kind of beliefs and values you bring to that job. Because in cultures, beliefs, values, rituals, and art are all kind of part of culture. especially important, I think, in nurses' tradition and lived ways are the beliefs and the values. So, how does that really influence the way the nurse leaders that we have here, Victor and Sylvia and you, and I think Maria, kind of live these values? I think it's just important for us to touch this. We've had a lot of conversation about values, and there have been values that have emerged in the conversations, but I think it would be great to talk about them if we can share.
Okay. Victor has his hand up.
Okay, Victor?
Thank you. Appreciate that. So to put it into perspective, I think, obviously responsibility and accountability are and they're pretty much in tandem. So you have accountability that arises from the responsibility part, right? You understand what the responsibilities are of your role. You understand that there are expectations of your role. And then that accountability piece gets tied in because you have someone that you need to answer to as well, as part as also, knowing that it is the right thing to do. And that's where that moral piece and beliefs come in. And then as leaders, sometimes you have to make some difficult decisions and challenging decisions that really, can impact you, morally as well. And I'll give you an example. So even throughout this pandemic, knowing that we were losing nurses because obviously they were traveling for higher wages, etc. We still had to make sure that those nurses and the staff members that stayed behind understood what their responsibilities were, and that we were still holding them accountable to what the expectations of their role was. And there were some instances, unfortunately, where staff members, nurses strayed from those responsibilities, and we had to hold them accountable. And unfortunately, there were some nurses that, we had to let go, knowing that we already had vacancies and knowing what additional stress this would place on the team. But as leaders, we know that that is the right thing to do. We know that it could have a very detrimental impact on the team or on the care of that patient and the outcomes of that patient. So it's a struggle. It's a constant struggle because you can't, maybe you can, but morally you shouldn't turn and look the other way and say, nah, that's all right. That nurse, they'll do better tomorrow. You can't do that. So having to, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add to what you're saying is that when we talk about accountability, some of the languages, what we count, what we are held account to, and the reckoning. So that's kind of what I think you're speaking about is in certain situations, there's a reckoning for one's behavior. You're held accountable.
Sure.
You're held to account. As opposed to evaluation is to look at what counts, what matters.
Right.
And so, I just wanted to
Correct.
build on what you were saying.
Yeah,
And I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, that's perfect. You're absolutely right. So, it really, it can play on your emotions sometimes, and make you even more vulnerable as a leader. And sometimes you really question yourself and say, gosh, did I make the right decision? But, knowing what our moral beliefs are, understanding what the expectation of our role is and that of our team members, and you live by example, right? And you have to set the example. So, yeah, I mean, it's a challenge sometimes, but we have to do what's right.
Thank you. And I see Trish, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to add what Victor's saying. I agree with him. There are times where nurse leaders have to make difficult decisions. We see that all the way through our profession, including at the state level with nurse practice negligence or malpractice or whatever is addressed on a bigger arena. But the reality is that that the nurse leader's responsibility, accountability starts way before the issues happen, way before COVID, by setting an example. I totally believe that leaders need to be the example. That starting with, a theory maybe, that grounds what you do, how you do, every policy, procedure, the whole culture should be around, say, that theory that you believe is the caring component for what you do and how you do it every day. And it's every day. It's not just, on the days you do rounds or whatever. It's setting that response, it's having faith. I believe that's the word. It's having faith in the nursing decision-making ability, that they know how to do things correctly. They know how to make decisions. They know how to prioritize. They do it every day in their job. And letting that, if you want to call it decentralized decision-making, shared governance, whatever you want to call that, has shown that nurses rise to the occasion when they feel that they have a voice in the organization. And that does start when it's not an emergency. It starts every day.
Thanks. You might want to take your hand down.
I was thinking, if there are no hands up, about what kind of symbols are there in nursing departments and healthcare organizations that demonstrate in the best way, that are most prized in the organization, that really represent nurse caring in the organization as a caring as a cultural phenomenon and commitment. I just wonder, what the symbols were. My DMP students talk the language of the theories and the models that are used. And in different organizations, it comes out. And I don't know that it's that, like a professional practice model as a symbol. I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Ann Boykin has her hand up.
I was just going back to this notion of accountability and thinking about it, whether you're a leader in academia or whether you're a leader in practice. And to me, that whole notion of accountability in those roles are you're accountable to yourself and you're accountable to the profession. And so I'm thinking, as you were talking, Zane, I'm thinking about Simone Roach's commitment and consciousness. And it kind of goes back to what Victor was saying. When we assume these roles of leadership, we have an expressed commitment. And that commitment drives, I think, what ought to be, the consciousness. So that what ought to be is guided by our values and our beliefs. And whether, I don't know, in any area of practice, holding on to and honoring, this is what really matters. These are my values and beliefs, and figuring out how do I live that out in my role, and sticking to it, figuring out a way to make that be because you believe it to be the right thing to be. I just, as you were talking, I'm just thinking of Simone and those two aspects of the professionalization of living nursing in that role. Thank you.
And Anne, I think that you also are alluding to prizing, valuing, and growing as dimensions of that, of what you've been speaking about. I don't know if you want to amplify that.
Yes, absolutely. That when you mentioned responsibility and evaluation before, Kathleen, the prizing is a reflection of the valuing of colleagues and how we honor and are with them in a way that is to enhance their growth in caring and in living their personhood and in practice. I don't know if that helps, but
I think one of the dimensions that you talk about when you talk about valuing, part of valuing is the story. The story makes the valuing evident. Marlene, your hand is up. And Anne, you might want to take yours down.
Oh, thank you. You know, I was just thinking that the importance of being clear, making clear what we're holding those persons that we were working with accountable for. So the clarity about values, and I think is very important. Language is important. So having the values visible, whether it's, you know, in the philosophy, and having that philosophy or mission statement in places where we all can see it. And those values would be, of course, related to caring. Integrating that language in our evaluation processes, or in our, you know, in our program, it would be in the curriculum, you know. So having that language and the values very explicit, because that's what we're accountable for. We're accountable for the mission, those values. So I think that's just what I wanted to contribute.
Well, I think I was always fascinated about the way certain affirmations, in a way, parts of the mission were distributed through a hospital that I was at for a long time, in the stairwells. And in a way, I guess that shows a reminder of not only of the language, but the meaning behind the language. And it was a way of keeping everyone aware of what the organization was concentrating on. And there, you know, there were a lot of different ways to do it.
Right.
I know. So that was kind of fascinating to me about your position, you know, your description of clarity. Actually, I think that shows what's prized in a way. It's a statement, and it shows what is prized as well. I'd kind of like to get back to Victor just a tiny bit, because of the notion of difficult decisions. And he spoke about basically living through that and making the case for the decisions. And I wondered if someone would just go on and expand on that a little bit, because there have to be styles to approach that. But then there are also, you know, obviously individual characteristics of that decision that might affect it. The way that nurse leaders deal with difficult decisions. I mean, budget, for example, staffing decisions, which are budget, and that kind of thing. So I don't know whether anyone would enlighten us in relation to that. It's difficult. All leaders have to deal with difficult decisions. So I don't know
Hi,
whether
it's Griselle. Can you hear me?
Hi,
It's
Griselle.
Good morning, everyone. So I actually have a non-COVID story to share related to this, and it's one that I'm still processing, even though it happened a few years back. And thank everybody for everything that you share so far. And my story is around the expectations that sometimes staff have when you are considered a quote unquote caring leader. There is this weird interpretation of caring sometimes as basically you are just a nice person that allows all kinds of behaviors to take place without holding people accountable because you're just trying to be nice. And that is the furthest from the truth. If anything, I think that at least in my experience, I've realized that in order for me to consider myself a caring leader, I have had to make very difficult decisions, especially related to staffing and letting people go, because their behaviors and um, their behaviors were in total contrast to what the expectations were, not only of the organization, but and also of the department. And the two instances that I had to intervene and finally let people go, made it all the way to like employee relations department in HR, and was accused of creating a hostile working environment. And when the interviews were completed from everybody involved, I still remember the ELR person who was assigned to us basically saying to me, so as I listened to everybody involved in this conversation, you are being accused of creating a hostile working environment because you're holding people accountable for their behaviors and they don't like it. and they're dragging other people down. So the person decided to leave. And the line outside my door of other staff members basically coming to me to thank me for basically making sure that this person was no longer part of the team was humbling, because I had allowed his disruptive behavior for almost a year and a half to take place without any consequences, and it was affecting everybody else. And when I finally basically put my big girl panties on and said, no more, this is not going to happen anymore. This is not how we're supposed to be running this department. And I put my foot down in a caring way, because I also didn't want this person to leave with a sense of purpose neither. I wanted him to go and grow someplace else. And people coming to me saying to me, thank you, because he has been dragging us down for a year and a half and we did not know what to do about it. That to me basically reinforced the fact that, and I didn't tell you that then after that happened, I was subjected to internet bullying and received the most disgusting descriptions of myself online and on emails that to this day we cannot trace back to the originators, but just from the language of it, I could possibly tell who they are from. But it really broke my heart, because what I was trying to do in my heart was to ensure that everybody in my department was flourishing, and this person's idea of flourishing was to bring others down, and I was not going to stand for it. And it has taken me a little bit. Well, it's painful, just because sometimes it's caring. Sometimes the most caring thing that you can do for somebody is to basically holding them accountable for their behaviors, and they don't appreciate it sometimes. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Giselle. And I see, Claudia, that you posted something in the chat, and I see, Yakma, that you are have your hand up. So Claudia?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not on camera because my camera's moving around, but I was listening to the conversation. Thanks, Linda. Listening to the conversation, and it struck me how we're talking about caring and language and leadership, and that the words matter. But as a leader, and as someone, I was a former leader in inpatient settings, is that we have many languages and many places we have to go to, and the finance and the regulatory. And I teach my students that we must know that language in order to create positive change in healthcare environments, in order to be able to sit at the table and have people understand what we're talking about. And my question is, you know, what do other people think, and how do we marry all those different roles as we create a culture of caring? That was all. Thank you.
Okay, I kind of want to go back to Griselle a little bit. Thank you, Griselle, and I'm sorry it hurt. I've had things like this happen to me as well, and it doesn't go away. So I hope there was support for you. But I also wondered about how, I talked to one of my colleagues who's in a difficult situation, and about how standards are set and performance is expected. And there are changes that go on in organizations. And I wondered how, with a reset of the culture, when a new leader comes in, for example, so anyone who's been a new leader who has reset, in a sense, expectations, how does that accomplished in a caring way? Because it's very difficult, I think, when a new leader comes in to a nursing organization. I do. So I wondered, Griselle, if you had insights to share, or if anyone else does, if Melissa, if Sobia, and anyone else could help us with that.
Hi,
Yeah,
this is Kim Brown. I was new to Boca in November of 2019. So being new, it was interesting taking over all of surgical services at that time. The organization had not had many changes. And then 2 months prior to me starting, Baptist had purchased Boca. So they had a lot of changes coming to them. 3 months after I started, the pandemic hit. So my departments had multiple changes, including all the managers in all the areas, processing, PACU, OR, and endo. So as far as change, it was very difficult for them. It's taken a lot of meetings, constant meetings. Melissa makes herself readily available because she's the constant that they know. I think it's just time. I think just working with the individuals one-on-one and letting them voice what's they think is a change or what they think should stay the same is important, because it's very hard on them. They've been through a lot, you know, at work. You spend a lot of time here, and to have constant change and then a pandemic thrown on it, it's a lot for everybody.
A super challenge.
Yes, this is Melissa, and Kim, I'm just going to be very open with the group since it's a small group. So Kim is not a new leader, but she's a new leader to the organization. And I probably didn't spend as much time with her. Well, I know I didn't, that I would if it wasn't in the middle of the pandemic, because her areas were very, a lot of surgery stopped and all that stuff. And I was really concentrating on the inpatient. So there was changes made, and people left, people came, people changed positions. And when I got involved, I realized that, you know, people come to an organization with what they know from other organizations, and what fits at one organization doesn't always fit at another organization. And so Kim and I have had lots and lots of conversations on what is our strategic plan to make sure that she can get what she needs accomplished and hold people accountable, but also support and care for the staff that's been here for a long time. And so one of the things I did right away is I started meeting with the staff individually and listening, and then would discuss strategies with Kim. So I think that it's very important when a new leader comes on that you really spend that time being able to know what they're doing, what's going on, talking about the culture, talking about the team, and really help guiding them. And I think that, you know, because of the pandemic, I failed her in a way, but things are much better now.
And actually another change that occurred, my position used to report to the CMO. So when I first came, I wasn't even reporting to Melissa till I think like 3 weeks before we shut everything down. So it was a lot of changes even there. It's been fun, but yeah, you definitely have to have the support above you and along with your team. So from both ends, and listening.
Yakima, you've had your hand up.
The name, it's Jalma.
Jama.
That's okay. Yeah, I've been,
You might want to take it
this-
down too.
wait a minute, let me get this, there, it's down. I've been listening. This is it's really a very full conversation. There's a lot of things going on here. And there's a lot that has been identified: accountability, responsibility. I'm not going to go through all of it, but as you were talking, for 20 years, when I left nursing, actually in a hospital setting, I worked as an organizational development consultant and coach. And most of the people that I worked with were executives and leaders. And at one point in time, in 2002 and 2003, I worked with a group of leaders who together we came up with an accountability responsibility grid that identified the characteristics of various styles of creating accountable organizations. And I'm sure that since 2003, there's a lot of changes that have occurred. And I just looked to see if I could find it on my computer. And I did, and I read through it and I said, oh, well, there could be a lot of changes on this since then. But I wonder if it might not be helpful in some way for us as the Academy, in some way to take some of these things that, like I created this grid. I also, it was a group of leaders from different organizations, which gave me the opportunity to have different perspectives, kind of like what we're doing here. And I acted as facilitator. So this was these things that were developed about accountability and responsibility led to something I did in 2007, which a couple of weeks ago, I shared it with D Ray. And it is basically it's a grid that puts together all the pieces we've been talking about that can be identified as necessary to creating a caring, accountable organization. And maybe this is something, and I'm sure that there are lots of conversations that could be had around it, but it would be something that we might be able to use as a starting point. I mean, I have a model of it. I have a model of the grid, and I would be willing to share that because it does need upgrading. I don't use the grid anymore, but I use the 4Cs model, which I shared with Dee, as a way to look at systems. And this might be something, I'm just offering that it might be something worthwhile for us to discuss.
Jalma, I have to jump in here because it sounds to me like it's an instrument that is validated but needs to be updated. And I think it's a challenge to you, Jalma, and other people to bring that forward and share it and work on it and get it validated. Put it through the old research process of content and expert validation. Sorry, my research, I just got anxious there about research.
No,
it sounds great, but
it is. It's just I have no affiliation to an academic institution. I have no affiliation to a clinical institution. So, I mean, a lot of these things are sitting here, and I don't really have the expert. I'm not a researcher, and I don't have the access to that. I mean, I think that there's lots of this that would be helpful, and that's just part of like 30 or 40 years of experience. And yes, I would love to have all that stuff validated. I don't have, like I said, I don't have that access. I'm in private practice, so, but I'm willing to share it in any way so that it can be, if it's useful.
Maybe there could be a commitment later on today by the people who are ending, our colleagues who are ending this, to see if there is interest in taking that and going forward with that, Jalma, because it sounds really, really good.
We have doctoral students on here. I see, Mary Ellen, that you have your hand up.
I am sitting here reflecting on the experience of being new, going back to that question, and reflecting on my career of all the new things that I have done in new places and acculturating into the new environment. And I always, when I do something new, I sit there and think, oh, I should be just taking notes about all my questions as a new person. I always mean to do that. And before too long, I'm just part of that organization and I forget what those questions were, what that experience was, and how it could have been better for me and for others if I had noted those things as I was going through it. And I think often we get into whatever culture it is, at work or play or whatever it is, and we don't get that reflection recorded so that we can better the system for the next person to bring them forward. And so I sit here and think about the idea of acculturation, about that melding into a community of caring. And you know, I was so blessed early in my career to be at FAU, to have Ann and Savina mentoring me, to have Dee Ray, that the words of caring, the language of caring, the being of caring was in the culture. And then I go somewhere else and I don't, the language is different. And so I'm gonna see if Dee's available to maybe bring in that point of culture in the organization, and how do we capture that for new people coming in and coming into a culture that we're trying to create a caring environment, and then how do we sustain that? What could we put in place? Thank you, Dee. I see you coming on. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Mary Ellen. Well, thank you. Speaking of culture, every system, you know, is a culture. Every person really is a multicultural, from the point of view that, you know, we're individuals, we're from families, we're from communities, you know, we understand, or we are part of an educational culture and various things like that. But my own view, in many respects, you know, there is an established culture in various organizations, you know, that is like culture is passed from one generation to the next as to how we are as cultural beings. So similarly in organizations. So, but culture, you know, like Zane had said, has to do with values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors that make up the culture, and it's infused into each individual, but individuals infuse their own cultures into the whole. So culture is like nursing, very complex, and includes multiple components, you know, to it. And cultures change, of course. We've been listening over the last day and a half about the changing culture relative to COVID. However, it has enhanced nursing rather than probably facilitated any disintegration, you know, related to our profession. So my own research, you know, suggests that often, you know, we focus a lot on the transpersonal component of our relationships, but not as much on what the culture is in these complex organizations and how they actually impact the way in which people become more aware or you know, seek additional understanding or facilitate various decisions or choices. So do think that the culture of an organization, like we're discussing a lot about, you know, the processes, the leader, you know, I go back to Plato. I think about him saying that the art of a statesperson, a leader, is actually how they do nurture. He used a concept called nurturing the herd, but, you know, nurturing people who are part of an organization or who are members of this organization, and how that leader nurtures in that context. So and how a leader creates a culture, and certainly those of us that are engaged in caring science, we focus on this culture of caring and have had the benefit of the various scholars who have developed more understanding about the meaning of caring, which again is another concept that is as complex as nursing and culture, the language itself. So I think that a leader is the one who actually, because of this notion of accountability and responsibility, facilitates the development of this culture, which has to do with values, beliefs, attitudes, meanings, and how that is transmitted to each other as leaders, but also to the members of the team in relationship to the patients who again come with multiple cultures, and how we try to understand this, within complex organizations. And, as a student of Leininger, with transcultural nursing, and where she identified, this complexity of culture in nursing as a culture, and nursing within cultures. And interestingly enough, in our complex world today, where we're identifying a concept of diversity, the concept of inclusivity, equality, equity, these concepts, interestingly enough, Dr. Leininger had developed probably close to 60 years ago, but they didn't come to the fore until we've had more understanding of what is going on within, especially our own culture. With the, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, or discussions and issues around critical race theory and all of this kind of thing. But all of these things also impact nursing, and will impact us as we go forward, because we are a microcosm, we are a microculture of the macro culture. That's I think Zane was looking at that interplay between the micro and macro culture. And and similarly, nurses within organizational cultures are kind of a microcosm of the macro culture, that is going on in the organization. So I just think that the more that we have knowledge about, the culture at large, and then going back to some of our major scholars in nursing, such as Rogers, who looked at that human environment interdality, that interrelationship, and how we have to have increased understanding of that integral relationship, and how we at the same time can facilitate positive change, within it. Like the new science tells us that it is within networks of relationship that we facilitate not only self-organization, or improving one's own being, but also this notion, which I feel in nursing, is this relational self-organization. It comes through the caring and loving relationship of nurses within cultures. And so I don't know if it seems like a long-winded response to your question, but the culture is with us. As I said, we are multicultures, and now, within the discipline of anthropology, for example, they are speaking about that we're not just one identity, we're multiple identities. We're what they use a concept called pan-identity and things like that. And so how do we understand those phenomena with one another, or having understanding of ourselves, but also when we engage with the other. And I just like to say in organizations, you know, we have many people from different culture groups who are a part of our nursing professional groups. And so how do we seek understanding and try to respect one another? Because as you know, oftentimes in organizations, you know, there can be a misunderstanding of the way in which other people might present themselves as a caring person, you know, and so it can cause also confusion or conflict in our system. So nurses, as professional nurses, we have to be knowledgeable and open, you know, to the world around us, which is increasingly complex.
Thanks. Thank you, Dee. That was incredible to listen to, actually. And I don't know if any more hands are up, but I began to think about the emphasis in healthcare organizations on outcomes, and the way that the HCAP surveys of different types have to be something that the nurse leaders deal with. And that goes down to all kinds of unit levels and so forth. And what I see is I see that people can choose some of the Watson Loving Caring items in as a selection for HCAPs, but I see through my DNP students who are at different levels of leaderships and organizations, most of them, I have some nurse practitioner students too, that there is a great deal of emphasis on, you know, very restricted, in a sense, items on HCAPs. And this, of course, has to do with reimbursement. And I just think that nurse leaders, you know, create with other people in the organization in an interprofessional way, projects that attempt then to change to the better, to improve or increase the outcomes. And I think that is a kind of a struggle with an organization, and sort of talks about, really addresses the multidimensionality of the organization, but also of their positions, because they're caring for leaders, they're caring for staff, and they're also they have a great deal of responsibility. So Kathleen, do we have any more hands up?
I did not see hands up, but there is information in the chat, and Dee, just to say that people are appreciating your wisdom and the concepts, I think, of pan-culturalism and what that brings to the conversation. Also, so Griselle, you had some comments back to you. Would you like to respond?
Sure. So when I was listening to Dr. Ray, sorry about that. It occurred to me that, there are two, definitely organizations are multidimensional. I mean, there are a microcosm of the environment where they are situated and the people that live in it. They're living organisms, as far as I'm concerned. And there's always, just like there are formal leaders and informal leaders, there is also a formal, quote unquote, culture that is created by the organization mission, vision, and values that look really pretty on a piece of paper. And there are organizations, and I have worked in those organizations that do their best to live up to that at all levels of the organization. However, there is also, unfortunately, an underculture of behaviors and attitudes that are allowed to occur. And that culture, when unchecked, it's more powerful than this veneer culture that sometimes we try to portray. And I have to, and with everything that's been happening with Black Lives Matter and, you know, and COVID and things like that, I'm pretty sure that every single one of our organizations have gone through a reckoning of really having to deal with realities that for certain areas of your employees has been the reality all along, but either people have chosen to ignore or were totally oblivious to it. And I know for me, with everything that's going on with, you know, this whole Black Lives Matter, and I'm Puerto Rican, you know, and I'm probably one of a few Puerto Ricans at Stanford, and I'm in a leadership role, and I had to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what is my role in creating and allowing uncaring behaviors happening in this organization, myself being a perpetrator of perhaps uncaring behaviors in this organization, and what can I do to create a more, not just inclusive, because I'm getting very worried that this whole word, you know, that in our efforts to be inclusive, we are also demeaning other people's live experiences. But what can I do as myself? Because the fact that I'm Puerto Rican, the fact that I am a nurse impacts how I view my role. And it
Right.
impacts how, and I wanted, so it worries me sometimes that we allowed that underpinning of behaviors to kind of take hold. And sometimes it's just us, the way that we do things, and we're not courageous to say, no, that is not what it means to be a caring organization. A caring organization is a place where we are vulnerable with each other. We share with each other how we need to be in love with each other so that we can flourish as a community, not just one person. And, you know, so that has been really big in my heart, because I have seen it. I've seen it in the many organizations that I work, that we sometimes allow things to happen without being unchecked. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great place to end up this section of our time together. And I think that you're ending with talking about both personal accountability. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that, and also how that translates to organizational accountability within the context of culture.